Titled How to Ensure Food Safety with Remote Audits During COVID-19 and Beyond comes to us from Shamonique Schrick. Shamonique is a solutions architect at Safety Chain with degrees in biochemistry and molecular biology and more than 10 years of experience as an auditor, food safety expert, and quality specialist. She has a wealth of knowledge to share. Shamonique supports customers in everything from reporting and analysis of data, standardization across processes and facilities, identifying best practices, and the blueprint process. Besides her work at Safety Chain, Shamonique has also worked as a food safety specialist and supplier quality specialist at Cargill, supplier quality auditor for Treehouse Foods, and microbiologist at Miller Coors. And with that, take it away, Shamonique.
Thank you. So today we are going to be discussing remote audits in the age of COVID-19 and what that looks like even beyond COVID-19. So today we're going to be discussing why remote audits are critical during COVID-19, critical steps to including your remote audit process, how to prepare for your remote audit, tips for working with your remote auditor, and benefits of remote audits during COVID-19. We'll also touch a bit on best practices for performing your own remote audits if you need to audit a supplier, and we'll also briefly touch on what technology could potentially do for us in the future. So starting out, why remote audits are critical during COVID-19. So we want to make sure that everyone is maintaining the same level of food safety standards and maintaining their certifications during this time. It's an uncertain time for everyone, and you want to be able to reassure your customers that quality and food safety standards are still being met and even exceeded. As far as potential risks with waiting to complete your audit, if you have that certification lapse, that does not give your customers much confidence in you and your processes. You could potentially lose customers if your certification lapses. There are also risks of programs failing due to lack of oversight during this high stress time and limited resources, as people are trying to figure out how to limit the amount of people on their floor and encourage social distancing. Your resources are going to be limited, which means that you're not operating the way you normally would, which means that there is the potential for processes to potentially not run as they are typically used to running. There are less plant management resources available, and you want to limit your exposure of employees on the front line. So those are some of the potential risks with waiting to complete your audit. As far as trusting food safety, right now, it's more important than ever to make sure that we are not putting out product that is going to cause foodborne illnesses. Just because people may not want to go to the hospital or go to seek care during this time because of the virus, the resources in hospitals are already overwhelmed, and there may not be any available to care for people who could potentially get sick from consuming products that are not safe. And then having remote eyes still allows that fresh set of eyes on remote audit still allows to have that fresh set of eyes on your process. You look at your processes day in and day out, which is great, but you also have things that you are used to looking at on a daily basis. Having that fresh set of eyes allows you to identify potential gaps that you may be overlooking due to familiarity with your processes. Everyone is a bit more distracted during this time, so things could unintentionally fall through the cracks. And having that fresh set of eyes will identify the gap and support the efforts to continue to produce safe products. We want to make sure that everyone knows during this time that food safety is not a compromise, and that we're all adapting to make sure that we're delivering the same quality and safe standard products that all of our consumers are used to receiving. So moving on to the critical steps of your remote audit process. If you are seeking to do your GFSI or certification audit, the steps for that audit occurring are pretty much the same as an on-site audit. The same care is going to be given to a remote audit, if not more care, as it would be to an on-site audit. So that means that there's going to be an opening and closing meeting, records review, employee reviews, and process inspections. The ability to share program documents and records is more critical than ever during the remote audit process. that method that you and your auditor decide to utilize in order to share the procedures and records of compliance will need to be in place. And this must be possible before and during the audit. So your auditors will still be asking for sample records to be reviewed at the time of the remote audit, and a trace exercise may also be conducted based on finished products, and you will need to be prepared for that. And then you also will have to be able to be in constant contact with the audit team. You need to have that open line of communication to build that trust and rapport that you would normally get from just being present in front of your auditor on site. So that means making sure that you have all of your meeting times set throughout the day at intervals, and your auditor must be able to get in touch with you in case there are questions or requests. Just remember that you need to treat this as you would an on-site audit, which means that you need to dedicate the time and resources to making this process go seamlessly. As far as key steps go, notify your certifying body that you need the remote audit. I know that GFSI has recently updated their stance on remote auditing and allowing for part of the audit to occur remotely, and then the other part has to be done on site. And the length of your audit is still the same amount of time. Your certifying body will review your application for your remote audit to ensure that the audit objectives can be achieved. If they cannot be achieved, you will not be approved for a remote audit. The technical teams will review and either approve or deny your request for a remote audit. And then that's when the process starts for you to upload your required documents. Completing the audit checklists and audit recommendations are made at that time. So for the biggest key to the success of a remote audit would be your planning. People are not used to doing this particular process, so the planning is going to be critical. You want to make sure that you've identified your key personnel that are going to be responsible for helping during the audit. You want to make sure that they're available, whether they're going to be available via video or on site at the time of the audit in the same place. That needs to be clearly decided and identified. You want to make sure that you gather your documentation that you need from your auditor. An auditor can sign an NDA agreement to make sure that they have access to everything that they need electronically prior to the audit. And any normal documentation that would need to be filled out on site still applies. So that would include your visitor's agreement that would be present for an auditor upon arrival. These things all should still be in place and still be performed as if an auditor was coming on site. You want to check your internet connection. I know a lot of people do not have Wi-Fi throughout their entire facility, and sometimes Wi-Fi is spotty, but you will need to work with your IT department if necessary to make sure that your internet connection can support the audit for the entire agreed upon time. You need to try to identify any potential issues ahead of time and let your remote auditor know as soon as possible so that you have a contingency plan in place in case you do lose internet connection. Like I said before, this process is different because you don't have the benefit of the doubt of your auditor being on site and building that trust and rapport. So you want to make sure that your means of communication stays open and that everyone is aware of any issues going forward. So that's not a barrier to you getting your audit completed. Work with the audit team to identify needs. So your audit team should identify the best method for conferencing, whether that's WebEx, GoToMeeting, Zoom, understanding your file sharing capabilities. For example, what documents will need to be uploaded? If you don't have any of your policy and procedures readily available online, how do you intend to have those uploaded? Who's responsible for that? And then are you going to put them on a SharePoint to give your auditor access? Will you email them? How will you manage these documents going forward? And then thinking about if your auditor requests records from a specific date, being able to quickly identify where they are, and then being able to scan and upload or take pictures to share with your auditor in a timely manner. And then gathering documents ahead of time. You should be prepared to share details about any changes to your programs and monitoring since your last audit. If you gather this information ahead of time, this will help your audit go a lot smoother and faster. So this is where having a digital way to manage these things is extremely helpful during the remote audit process. I think that probably the organization and planning of the audit is underestimated. And that's one of the biggest barriers to how fast your audit will go. So if you think about these things ahead of time and try to prepare as much as possible, it will help you to expedite the process of your remote audit. So tips for working with your remote auditor. Um, Make sure that you're using your webcams for meetings and visual inspections. GFSI did approve the use of ICT in the remote audit amendment, so you will be able to do that. So that means that your auditor can still talk to people out on the floor. They can talk to your employees. They conducting those interviews are critical to performing an audit, and you still want to be able to have that as part of your audit process. If there are questions on a critical process step, being able to either show the step via video or a recording may help to answer questions. I know some people do not like recordings because they don't want to have that out there. So being able to have those video calls will be extremely helpful. Stay calm. So if things don't go well with your internet connection and things like that, having that contingency plan will help you to feel better prepared for this. Audits are already stressful, and adding in the challenge of being remote can cause additional stress on everyone. So take your time, and the auditor will be patient, as this is a new process for everyone involved. Just that mutual understanding, I think, will help everyone to expedite this process. You also want to make sure that you have a quiet environment. I know that a lot of times we're at home these days, and if part of your audit you won't be on site and you're at home, try to make sure it's as quiet as possible when you're speaking by phone or video chat. Background noises can interfere and distract the people that are involved, and having that quiet environment can help the process move along a lot more smoothly. And you want to have minimal interruptions. That's similar to an on-site audit. The remote audit will demand your full attention. Just because it's remote doesn't mean that it's any less intensive. It's the same level of care that you would have for an on-site audit. Of course, there are times where you may be needed elsewhere, and that's understandable. That would happen on-site as well. We just want to make sure that we're getting the best use of our time during the remote audit. And we want to make sure that we finish up in the required duration. That's where that prep and planning comes into play. And then test drive. Download whatever applications that you're going to be utilizing during the audit on both sides to make sure that everyone can log in successfully, everyone can hear everyone, cameras are working, all of those things. And if you identify any issues, ask your IT department for help. And if you require permissions to be granted in order for certain applications to work, make sure that that is in place prior to starting your audit. Like I said, we want to make sure that the audits are still taking the allotted amount of time. And all of these things will help to make sure that it stays within that time. So benefits of remote auditing beyond COVID-19, you'll be able to save on auditor and personnel costs. If the auditor doesn't have to be on site for all 3 days of your GFSI audit and potentially just one, then that's great. You can save money there. There's flexibility and adjusting to remote working. So it's more common for people to be working remotely. And it's not going to, as it evolves, it's going to be more commonplace for remote audits to occur. Health and safety concerns, we still aren't through the pandemic as of yet. I know we have a vaccine out there, but as of now, we still haven't gotten through the worst of it. So a lot of people aren't going to want to travel. They aren't going to want to have visitors on site. It's more difficult to manage visitors, to encourage social distancing, and having to wear all of the extra PPE can be a bit much. So having a remote audit will be beneficial in the future, not just now, but even in the future, even keeping those things in mind. You'll be able to keep your certification current, and if you're doing remote audits, you should have a faster preparation time. As you start to move things into an electronic database and have those things readily available, it's a lot easier than going through and bringing in your roller cart full of binders that has all of your documentation and records. If you have that readily available and easily searchable in an electronic database, that makes things 10 times easier than having to leaf through binders and figure out where things are. You'll also be able to have, for the faster preparation time, you'll be able to have documentation and records that are secured as well. And you should be able to expedite your review process doing it that way. So I know we've been talking about if you are being audited, but there can be a time when you will decide that you want to perform remote audits of your own suppliers. And we've noticed some best practices with some of our customers in Safety Chain. They do it from a risk assessment perspective, and they basically put out like a little COVID-19 questionnaire and review of their supplier GFSI audit report. And based on the review of the audit report and the COVID-19 assessment, they create mini audits or questionnaires based on that information. So those mini audits usually look at the critical programs to the food safety management system. So like the HACCP program, sanitation, sometimes supplier quality, looking at changes to those in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also just changes in general, if any changes have been made since the last time anyone was on site or from their GFSI audit. And then based on that information, you can give your supplier a remote assessment score, and that can be used to prioritize if you need to do an on-site audit. These risk assessments typically already follow the risk assessments or the risk score given to a supplier based on the ingredient type and how it's being utilized. And it's not something that needs to be created if you have a robust supplier quality program, which makes this a lot easier when deciding who needs to be audited and which suppliers should be looked at first. Obviously, if you have a supplier where they're controlling the kill step and it's ready to eat when it comes into your facility, that would be a riskier supplier. Or if you have a supplier whose audit certificate is expiring within the next 3 months, you want to know what their plans are for certification. You want to know if they intend to perform a remote audit or if that's going to lapse, and determine what your plan of action should be, especially to determine if you need to potentially identify an alternative supplier and if that's going to disrupt your supply chain or your product safety. So those are some of the best practices that we noted during the remote audit process. But if you have more questions, you can absolutely reach out and we can talk about it. So right now, I would say that we don't have as much technology involved in the remote audit process as I think there could be in the future, especially as internet connections and 5G rollout gets wider and more robust. Having that ability to connect to Wi-Fi in facilities, I think will open up a lot of doors going forward in the future. I think that we could even be seeing mixed and augmented reality that will become common solutions for audits. And IoT, if you have more automated data, then that's more of a continuous monitoring, and you'll be able to readily access that in the future. And you'll have those enhanced data analytics that I think that people are missing out on now. Obviously, none of this stuff is actually happening at this moment, but these are just future things that could potentially happen. And I think it would be really cool. It would definitely help to make sure that the remote audit process continues, and that it continues in a way that is an improvement from how it started. So I appreciate you all listening to the presentation. If you have any questions about current remote audit processes or future states, please feel free to reach out to us here at Safety Chain. And it's been a great presentation. Thank you guys.
And thank you, Shamonique Schrick, for your perspective on food safety remote audits during and after the pandemic. And that concludes this presentation.